All right, thanks everyone. So, my little introduction here. So I've been with the Alexander Company for about 22 years. Started at the National Trust Community Investment Corp, which is the for-profit subsidiary of the National Trust. And so we do a lot. I got to see a lot of really complex adaptive reuse of historic structures. And then Alexander Company, we started off in 1982. We've been around for about 40 years, second generation company, done about 280 buildings. And so the Alexander Company really got our start. I'm going to kind of flow through some of these. Really got our start picking up a lot of the earliest LIHTC historic projects done in '86, right when the low-income housing tax credit started. The company had been around since 1982. They were doing adaptive reuse of historic structures, but started really focusing on what I think I'd call the low-hanging fruit, where you didn't necessarily need a state of Wisconsin historic credit. So after a point in time, it came to where we were doing a lot of LIHTC developments throughout the Midwest and not in Wisconsin, and then really focusing on the East Coast, Missouri, anywhere where they had a good state program, we were trying to tackle affordable housing developments. And that's much like Gorman and Associates. So both firms started out in Madison. The state of Wisconsin then got a historic credit. We almost lost our federal credit. So this is one of my favorite pictures of, this is 10 years ago, actually in 2015. This is Matt, Renee Kuhlman, Paul Ryan, trying to work to make sure that we didn't lose our federal historic credit. Again, this is my favorite preservation photo of all time. And this really, kind of gave us the opportunity to really start then focusing back on Wisconsin and doing the work, where we actually all live in our own backyard. But this is one of those earliest projects, the Fox River Mills. This particular development was one of the old paper mills up in the valley. This one was showcased throughout by the National Park Service, how to do affordable housing within historic structures. Again, very early deal. I grew up in the Fox cities, but those were the types of projects we took on until, again, the state of Wisconsin credit came. Right when that credit rolled out, we took on the Longfellow School. Well, this isn't a historic deal. This was really the first project I think that was almost completed. We ran once that state credit, the increase passed in 2013. Got this one wrapped up in 2014. But I think that a lot of you know what these old schools look like. Fortress building is another one of our big venture back into Milwaukee again, doing the Milwaukee Fortress, where we used an uncapped $9 million in credits, 132 apartments. I'm going to go really fast through these until we kind of get to the Soldier Home. But this is where we developed our relationship with J.P. Cullen, who is the contractor in the Milwaukee Soldier Home development. But this was primarily just 132 units of market rate. We built Cullen a new headquarters, and then we built out some commercial space for Miller Communication. We used the credit then also on the Beloit College Powerhouse. This is one that Jen was the reviewer on with the state. This one we really saw where philanthropic dollars and nonprofits, could combine to use the state of Wisconsin credit and the federal historic. We acted as a consulting developer on this particular project, making sure that all the Part 2s got in place and put together all the financing in addition to the large philanthropic donation that was required by Beloit College in order to take this former Alliant Energy power plant. Again, I'm just kind of going through really quickly to show you the kind of developments that we take on. Courthouse. This is an important one to kind of show what we're going to do on Soldier Home. We really developed a knack of taking federal surplus property and then purposing it to a new use. Under the Section 106 or the 1966 Preservation Act, federal agencies can't just let the public's resources go to hell, basically. So if they don't have any use to them, they have to check if there's another federal agency that does, and if they don't, they really have to work with the public in order to try to figure out what is the best use for this project. And in Kansas City, we took a 1930s Art Deco courthouse and repositioned it as affordable housing. We worked through the General Service Administration in order to do 176 apartments of affordable housing. We restored even the old courtrooms on this one, and it turned into a really beautiful project. National Park Seminary then is really the first large-scale adaptive reuse of a campus. And the first development I worked on with the company, this was in Silver Spring, Maryland. We did 50 condominiums, 13 single-family homes, 90 townhomes, 66 apartments that were affordable. So we worked through the Maryland State Housing Authority in order to get a 9% low-income housing tax credit award. And we worked on this really beautiful mixed-use campus. This campus was first an elite girls finishing school that was taken over under the Warden Powers Act to be a convalescence hospital in 1942 after World War II, and then really left abandoned since 1970, since right after the Vietnam. So it was the Walter Reed Medical Annex. We took it, did this large-scale adaptive reuse project right during the recession with a lot of condominium risk, lots of contractors that were signing off that they were paying their subcontractors and weren't, and it ended up one hell of a nightmare for us. But I'm blaming that more on the economy, but it was the Washington, D.C. metro area. So anyway, lessons learned. Really complex development that turned then into another large-scale master development. This was the Lorton Prison Complex. So this is in Lorton, Virginia. This was basically the Washington, D.C. Federal Penitentiary. There were all sorts of plans that were done on what do they do with this prison complex, and they saw us stumbling around up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they're like, hey, let's talk to those guys. We have all of these plans that are collecting dust on the shelves, but let's try to figure out if they can do some affordable workforce housing, some mixed development. And so yeah, we worked on this for about a decade and are just wrapping up the last phases. But we took an old prison complex. There's going to be a state prison complex up in Green Bay that will hopefully be coming up for redevelopment. So a lot of anywhere that has a prison that's sitting empty, guess who they're calling? So we're trying to stay away from the ones with the electric chairs. One of the things I wanted to touch on that Matt said, there were certain states that we focused on. Wisconsin, again, had a 20% credit. There were old 40% state credits in North Carolina. This was an affordable housing development in North Carolina of an old blue jean dyeing factory. This was the condition that it was in, but with a 40% state historic credit, you can really make a wonderful project. This one was done a few years back. Same with Rhode Island, great state credit. These, again, were some of the developments that we did. And again, I'm trying to just burn through this quick until we get to this baby. So this is the one that I'm really supposed to be talking about. This is the Milwaukee Soldier Home. And I think I've been involved with this project for about 20 years. Right when I got back from Washington, D.C. and my time at the National Trust, I took a walk around this campus. In 2004, I was given a tour by someone that worked at the VA. It had been sitting empty for decades, and I told them, hey, one of these days I'm going to work on this. And that individual that gave us a tour, her name was Laura Rinaldi, and I happened to be with my father at the time, and we were just walking around. My dad was from Milwaukee, and Laura looks at my father and goes, Tom Beck, Laura Rinaldi, Pius High School, class of 1969. So Laura recognized my father on this tour. This is just one of these weird side notes, but Laura always stayed really close in touch on this project, sourcing original material. She was the historian of it, knew where the historic doors were. So a lot of you are familiar with the Historic American Building Survey. There was a HABS study that was done on this particular project. But this, I think there were a lot of veterans, soldiers living on the streets after the Civil War. The women of Milwaukee started raising funds, raised $110,000 at that time. Right when that was going on, Lincoln signs his last piece of legislation to create a system of care for veterans. The women of Milwaukee were convinced, hey, send that money into the federal government. Let's see if we can get selected as one of the first sites, which they were. They purchased 40 acres and started building in 1867. The first structure, Old Main, which these are some old lithographs. This is some of the Soldier Home fare when they were raising the dollars. Nice quote by Abraham Lincoln about binding up the nation's wounds after the Civil War. The condition, this building was left empty since 1989. The roof had collapsed in 2010. That's when all the preservationists really got behind, hey, we need to save this. And I think the state always had this quote, if this isn't worth saving, you know, really what is? We really got to get behind this. So Milwaukee Preservation Alliance, the Wisconsin Historical Society, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, all really started putting some muscle behind moving the VA to do something with this after that roof collapsed in what's the old dining hall. So in 2014, we ended up finally getting the VA to put out a request for qualifications for developers. And in 2013, I reached out to go get the Historic American Building Survey drawings. So I emailed HABS and I said, hey, this is a program with the Library of Congress and the National Park Service. I used to have a library card. Think I could check out maybe the AutoCADs, because one of the best things about working with the government when they put out an RFP, they put out like 2 weeks. Hey, figure all this out, put your proposal in, and it's like impossible deadlines. And we knew that this would be a challenging one, so we got the HABS drawings for our architects to start working with. So 2014, they put out this request for qualifications, and on that, while all of the Community Advisory Council and preservationists, that helped move the needle a lot, it was really a LIHTC investor, National Equity Fund, that had done some veteran housing projects nationally that was meeting with the VA and said, hey, there's this firm, the Alexander Company, out of Madison. There's this guy, John Beck, who's always given me a phone call. They really want to do this development and turn it into housing for veterans that are at risk of homelessness. So the VA then, were really then nudged that, hey, there is the skill set in order to take a National Historic Landmark that's sitting on a VA campus and repurpose it to veterans housing. So we repurposed, we proposed that Old Main become 80 units of housing, the administration building become an SRO development, and then we took all of the officers' housing and turned that into family housing units. So that RFP came out in 2016. Our first partner on that was Volunteers of America. They ended up thinking that the project may be too complicated and they backed out, so we partnered with Housing Authority of the City of Milwaukee to be our nonprofit partner and help us operate it. That was one of the biggest mistakes of the entire project, given what happened to the Housing Authority of the City of Milwaukee being a bunch of morons. But you know, sorry, it's the end of the day. Get some stand up. There's some people at HUD that won't disagree, but we are operating the facility now. Anyway, so the Milwaukee Soldier Home redevelopment, the financing capital stack in some of these. So the architecture is hard, and I was talking with a historic developer yesterday, a fellow named Justin Fern out of Rockford. And he was saying the capital stack and putting some of these deals together is about 70% of the project, landing the money, and especially on affordable housing. These affordable housing programs are tough. You heard from a lot of developers on this. This one was the toughest, but also maybe one of the easiest in order to get it financed, only because there are often cost caps with how expensive these projects are. There's the historic credits that help offset that cost, but there's also pressure that the public and these agencies feel like there might be pushback if you're spending more per unit on an affordable development with public dollars than the public can even afford for their own homes. So if you're spending $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 on a unit to restore a National Historic Landmark, there might be some pushback from the state agency saying, hey, some people are going to start looking at this and we could blow up the entirety of this program. So there were cost cap limits on how high you could go with WIDA. We had to get the cost caps removed on this, because this project, we lined up a lot of soft money, but we approached WIDA and they said, yeah, we really don't do this. And we're like, all right, how many Lincoln Legacy projects are you going to have that are National Historic Landmarks? This is not going to create a precedent. Swear to God, there's not going to be other developers coming in doing this type of housing. And public housing authorities do have a waiver of this because they're building 80-year properties. This is going to have to last another 100 years here. So we did get that cost cap, and then we also did something really complex where we did a 9%, 4% hybrid transaction where we put just enough 9% LIHTC credits, the competitive credit, and then took all that excess basis and took those credits and made that a 4% tax credit. 2 different condominiums in that big old main building, and it was really a first in the country to see a hybrid structure and a historic building like this. And so the Novogradic journals and everything wrote it up. We had state of Wisconsin historic credits, federal historic credits, and what happened during when we were putting together this capital stack financing, tax reform happened. So when we were running around meeting with Paul Ryan at first, things really heated up in 2017, and they changed the state historic tax credit program, or federal historic, to a 5-year credit. The state of Wisconsin became a 5-year credit. Corporate tax rates came down to 21%, and then we had a $5 million hole in like our project. And so then we were like, okay, shit. VA, we're working through our lease. We don't have that signed yet by Congress, and we said we might have to stop this project with what just happened with tax reform. And they're like, okay, shit. What's it going to cost if we had to take this down? And they're trying to get at what would the gap be? Maybe if we gave you the money, we'd have to take it down. That could fill the gap. And so we got military construction funding, which was basically some wall money at the time, we were told. And they're like, here's $5 million. That was really the adjuster. This is where it's kind of amazing working with the VA. So we got that military construction funding. We then also did a capital campaign with Greater Milwaukee Foundation and Milwaukee Preservation Alliance. So those dollars came in, federal home loan dollars. We got 2 Save America Treasures grant that came in right when we broke ground, and a bunch of other, affordable programs in order to make this capital stack of $44 million work. This is some of the nerdy stuff on the way that we structured the tax credits. New York Times did a nice story and highlighted my fanny climbing up a ladder. And this was one of my favorite keepsakes that I was told, your mother must be so proud. So this is the hybrid New Deal design of the way that we did that 9% and 4% credit in this program. We also had to get WIDA approval in order to do that hybrid structure. And the underlying operating subsidy on this are VASH vouchers. Ted talked a little bit about Section 8. Section 8, that last project that you looked at, that had Section 8 vouchers. VASH vouchers are basically Section 8 vouchers, but for veterans. And it took us 3 years to get the vouchers in order to make sure that every one of the 101 units that we created had that operating subsidy with the VA case management that comes for with a voucher. They're very competitive. So as we were trying to figure out the timing of tax reform and getting those military construction funding, our clock ran out on the 9% credits that we were awarded. And we asked the VA, hey, could you reissue, WIDA, could you reissue these? And they're like, yeah, we don't do that. You're gonna have to go in and reapply. And then I was like, okay, but you know that you're just gonna award them to us again, so can't we just skip that whole step? And they said no, because then every other developer will want that same. And then I'm like, but this is a special project. It's Abraham Lincoln, take out the violin. And they're like, you've already tried that once. We gave you the cost cap. You can't keep playing that card, Beck. And then I said, how about this? All the VASH vouchers that we got are gonna go to California, and you're gonna look like a bunch of dumb shits that you just left this $10 million like operating subsidy go. And then they're like, that's a really good point. We can't lose the VASH vouchers to another state. And then they're like, okay, you can do your hybrid deal and we'll reissue the credits, but you're gonna pay a bunch of fees. And so that was the second area where WIDA came in. So WIDA's tough. They can't just bend the rules for you unless you have a really good case. So if you're doing a National Historic Landmark with a ton of VASH vouchers that Abraham Lincoln was involved with, you can get some strings pulled. These are the Habs drawings. They're really detailed. Ramlo Stein did the work, but this is not their drawing. These are the architects at the state. This is Tony Evers, and every politician, kind of like in Wisconsin, taking credit for this at the groundbreaking. This is then while we're under construction and COVID had hit. So this was one of those favorite projects that we ended up flipping out right when COVID hit and everything shut down. We were running like, can't stop construction. But the project opened up 5 years ago. These are some of the photographs of the after. Milwaukee PBS did a really nice documentary on it that showed on Veterans Day in November of 2023. So really, really gorgeous development for a veteran-focused public housing development and a National Historic Landmark. Even restored the slate roofs, went to the same quarry in Vermont where the original slate was sourced. This is the administration building, restored all the original post office boxes, all the tin walls. These are then this is the Catholic chaplain's quarters. One of the nice donation walls of having a capital campaign. If you're ever stuck, throw a nonprofit into your development because you're gonna need it anyway in the future to make these developments work, because they're gonna have to raise some philanthropic dollars probably. And so this won the Richard Driehaus Award. I like this one, the 2021 Historic Tax Credit Development that Overcame Significant Obstacles Award. So I didn't make that up. That's actually an award. So they're like, yeah, that guy, Alexander Company, they get that. I'm gonna quick go through. That's a project in Danville. This is a 500,000 square foot warehouse. This has just got, this is not Soldier Home, but it's a really cool development that we just wrapped up. But I'm going to go to kind of the next phase of what we're doing on Soldier Home.
And John, let me just say something, just as a fellow developer.
Yeah.
I would have to say that I've been doing this for a long time. And John, when he did this project, which is the gorilla of all projects, I tell you. As a developer, you're like, how did you ever get that done? But the greatest line that I saw of your sources was that capital campaign. When you have a $5 million gap and you are a developer, you run the other way, it's over.
Yeah.
And he put in fundraising. And I was like, that is the most amazing, brilliant thing. And I have to say, for these historic projects, that is not, he did it. He's the pioneer. He took all the arrows. That is really not out of the question. If you have a $1 million, $2 million gap, because I saw that, I'm like, that's a source.
Yeah.
No one's going to believe you, but if you can convince your bank and your lender that this is a worthy project, you're going to get it done. Yeah, and you got to put your development fee really at risk in order to get those dollars in. But I sat on a number of nonprofits. So Goodman Community Center used historic credits, and so I saw that being done. I was working on the Beloit Powerhouse. And Dan Schoof at the college was fundraising, and I'm like, hey, if Dan can do it for the Powerhouse, there's been so many people that want to do it on this, there's no reason not to do it. And so I'm gonna quick go into what this next phase is. How am I doing on time here? I got 2 minutes. There were other buildings at Soldier Home, the theater, the chapel, and the governor's residence, so we're taking those on now. There was a study that the National Trust funded and got some dollars to Milwaukee Preservation Alliance and said, hey, let's figure out how to do these other really cool buildings, this old theater and this chapel and governor's mansion that hadn't been used in decades. And we volunteered for the study, J.P. Cullen did. There's a number of architects, Miller Dunwitty got paid on it. And, but we wanted to make sure that these buildings were restored correct. The price tag on it was about $30 million. After the state and federal historics and Save America Treasures grants and DOA grants and new market credits, we knew we were gonna have a $15 to $20 million gap. And so the VA knew that we did some fundraising, as Ted was mentioning, and then they're like, okay, great, 15 to 20 million. you guys want to do it? And it's just like, no way in hell do we want to do this. We want someone else to share in the glory and the fun of doing one of these projects. And so there weren't a lot of people signing up. And this attorney gives me a call at the VA. And he said, John, you ever hear of the PACT Act? And also HAB's drawings were done on these buildings. The PACT Act was for veterans that were exposed to toxic burn pits. It got passed at the end of 2022. In that funding package, the VA got $933 million to work with private developers in order to bring more housing and services on VA campuses under enhanced use leasing. They said, we haven't done a service project yet. We've done some housing projects. You got that Milcon funding. What did you say that you needed? And I was like, 15 to 20 million. And they're like, well, if we get you 15, will you take on the project? And I said, well, yeah. And so, but it took us a year to negotiate that out. They finally announced that in February of 23, and we've been putting together the capital stack. We're at 90% of the drawings in order to return these buildings, again, to veteran services. And again, we added a capital campaign to it. This time, $2.5 million is needed for the construction and $2.5 million for an operating endowment. Center for Veterans Issues is going to be our operator on the facility, and we created a new nonprofit called the Milwaukee Soldiers Home Art and Legacy Foundation that will be taking on the facility. So we already even hired the director to do this. But it helped to volunteer on a lot of these nonprofits that were restoring historic theaters, like the West Bend Theater, the Al Ringling Theater, even the Milwaukee Symphony and the Warner Grand, in order to operate this facility. So we're going to be breaking ground on this in October, and that's going to be amazing. And this is our study that was given to the VA and some of our numbers, and that's kind of like where we're at. Yeah.
What are those three buildings going to be used for? That was always the question.
Oh, the theater is going to be a theater. The chapel is going to be another venue for gatherings, for funerals, for weddings, for counseling. And then the governor's residence is going to be a home for Center for Veterans Issues to do more services and workforce training with veterans. We did another affordable housing development with CVI. They're the largest veterans service organization in this state. So they're our nonprofit partners, so they'll be taking over the mansion and meeting with veterans and doing work on the VA campus that the VA is not doing. So they want to make sure that there's no overlapping of services on that because they're making these dollars available. So we are at that point of just lining up and landing our new market tax credit allocation on that phase of the development. So really they're being used for their intended purposes again, just kind of like the first 6 buildings that we did at Soldier Home. That was for the housing component. Now this is for the services to give, you know, the opportunity to really thrive then on the campus and bring members of the community back onto the VA campus so that they can enjoy, you know, different types of veteran programming. So that's all I got. So.